a new government.
Hello, William, can you tell us how the talks have gone?
We've had an initial meeting, that's all there is to say about it at the moment.
And do you think you have the makings of a deal?
We've had an initial meeting, can't say more than that.
When the Lib Dem negotiators returned to their party HQ, they gleefully reported the speed with which their new friends were junking their own policies.
We felt that the fruit was coming off the tree so readily that we ought to go back with a shopping list of, people were saying, well, but seize the moment, guys, go on, they'll do PR in a second, they'll be doing electoral reform completely, we could have laws reform next year. I mean, it was becoming sort of surprisingly too good to be true.
The Tories were actually saying, yes, of course you can have that too. Would you like this? Because we've been trying to get rid of this for some time.
Labour didn't stand idly by whilst the Tories wooed the Lib Dems. They love-bombed old friends with calls, texts and emails in an effort to keep alive the dream of their two parties working together.
It was like a patchwork quilt where all of us were seeking to create this great quilt, but all working on different bits at different times and then trying to sew the whole thing together.
I was talking to people I knew, Gordon was obviously talking to people, Andrew was, Peter was, we all were. Now, I don't know Nick Clegg, but I do know his predecessors pretty well. And I'd say to a man, they were saying, for heaven's sake, we don't want to get into bed with the Tories.
After the result, then I talked to Gordon Brown on 3 or perhaps even 4 occasions over the critical weekend. The message I wanted to get to him was that for me, and a lot of Liberal Democrats, the more natural position was to see whether or not an arrangement could be made with Labour.
There was, though, one conversation that really mattered. That between the Prime Minister and the current Lib Dem leader. On the night after the election, Gordon Brown called Nick Clegg from Number 10.
What he had to do was to make Nick Clegg comfortable with the idea of serving in a coalition, the two of them tethered together.
Gordon Brown do anything in that phone call to make the chemistry right?
I just think he might have given Nick more space, more opportunity to speak rather than to be spoken to. I think there should have been a little bit more of, come to me rather than I'm telling you where to go.
Was it a tricky conversation? A friend of yours told the media it was a diatribe and a rant.
No, it wasn't a diatribe and it wasn't a rant from Gordon. He spoke more than I did. He wanted to make sure his side of the story was heard as well. And I think, I didn't... and I've seen reports saying that it was somehow some sort of, acrimonious conversation. It didn't feel like that, but he was, that's fair to say, I think, he was keen to sort of put across his point of view, and I was just quite keen to explain the way I wanted to proceed.
Party leaders who clash in public at Westminster can still get on in private. Not Clegg and Brown. They'd fallen out over how to handle the scandal of MPs' expenses.
Nick Clegg found him absolutely impossible, didn't he?
No, I don't think Nick found him absolutely impossible, and I think he found him a bit Gordonish.
Day 2. A national commemoration will force the main actors in this plot together on a public stage. It's the 65th anniversary of VE Day. The three leaders set off for the Cenotaph for their first meeting since the last TV election debate.
You hopeful of a deal, Mr. Cameron?
David Cameron sensed he was making headway on a deal with the Lib Dems. Gordon Brown still believed he had the chance to gazump the Tories. And Nick Clegg knew whoever he chose, he would need his party's MPs and activists to vote for the deal. Publicly, all three said policy was what really mattered. Privately, personality would prove crucial.
I understand that relations between Clegg and Gordon Brown were never very good. Whereas, of course, with David Cameron, I mean, they're not quite two peas in a pod, but they come from very similar backgrounds. Public school education, Oxbridge, relatively affluent backgrounds.
But Nick Clegg could not simply choose who he might feel most comfortable with. Demonstrators besieged an all-day Lib Dem meeting held to discuss what the party should do next. They demanded a change to Britain's voting system and warned him not to sell out to the Conservatives.
But take it from me, reforming politics is one of the reasons I went into politics. Thank you very much, thank you.
Inside the meeting, old hands urged their leader to talk up a possible deal with Labour to lever concessions out of the Tories.
I said, look, if you were selling your house, you wouldn't just sell it to one buyer. A bit of competition would do no harm.
There was no possible way we could have a bargain with the Tory party with any chance of getting things through if we had not puffed up the possibility of making a bargain with the Labour Party.
That the people of this country are entitled to expect.
In order to puff up that possibility, the party had to start talking to Labour. So minutes after one of the Lib Dem negotiators said this,
We will be continuing our talks with the Conservative Party as the party with the largest number of seats and votes.
he and his colleagues headed for secret talks with the other side.
I mean, we were under huge pressure from Labour, I think, behind the scenes to have some sort of discussion with them, understandably. And we obviously didn't want the Prime Minister simply to chuck the towel in and go down the road to Buckingham Palace.
The first talks between Labour and the Liberal Democrats could have stopped the momentum towards a deal with the Tories. But the negotiating team which Gordon Brown sent to Portcullis House, opposite Big Ben, was divided between enthusiasts for a deal like Peter Mandelson and those like Ed Balls who were deeply sceptical. Their offer was, as a result, a little vague.
You may be surprised, given that this was the opening gambit of a negotiation for a future coalition government. But no, we didn't have a document, a paper, an agreed negotiating position. I mean, we were sort of flying blind in that sense.
But the Liberal Democrats must have seen an extraordinary contrast. The Tories had presented them with a detailed policy document with 11 separate headings, with a series of compromises, and the Labour Party came in with not very much.
Well, the Conservatives may have been prepared for the possibility of a hung parliament and a coalition, which we were certainly not prepared for.
We'd had really no discussion in advance, and I don't think I even knew who was going to be in the room.
You didn't have a negotiating brief?
No.
You weren't going to make them an offer they couldn't refuse?
No.
Not only had Labour no offer to make, but also their leader had left London to spend a night at home in Scotland. Ed Balls had warned him that if he stayed in Downing Street, he would risk looking like he was clinging to power.
Good evening, sir.
Evening.
But David Cameron stayed put. He had an important date that night. The Tory leader went into a back entrance at Party HQ and then gave the media the slip.
We saw David Cameron arrive. I counted him in. I haven't been able to count him out. So the assumption has to be that he did go out of this building some other way, and who knows where he's gone.
Nick Clegg, are you any closer to a deal? Where am I going?
No one was meant to know where he was going.
There was a bit of sort of jumping in one car and another. We eventually met in Admiralty House, in a room which felt, yes, very cloak and dagger. The curtains were drawn.
A building which had witnessed many historic meetings was now the scene of the first between two men forging Britain's first coalition for more than 60 years.
David Cameron and Nick Clegg decided they wanted to meet alone, so they swept past these great scenes of former naval battles, leaving behind them in the hall their party advisors and the civil servants who'd come here to offer support, and made their way into this small room, leaving behind people to wonder anxiously how they were getting on. Perhaps what they realised is that the key to any negotiation, the key to any deal between them, was simple: personal chemistry. Did you at that meeting have a feeling, because you were on your own, was that a moment you thought, I tell you what, I could share government with this guy?
Oh, I think by that stage I was thinking that things like that would be possible. We hadn't got by that stage, hadn't got anywhere near details or who would work and how and all of that. But definitely the relationship was good. We were getting on.
No, I remember thinking, yeah, this might lead further than I might otherwise have imagined it could do. And I think we probably both surprised each other to the degree to which we both appreciated that we were in a totally new situation and we needed to be flexible and open and pragmatic about seeing what would happen next.
You sensed, maybe I was saying exactly the same to the other guy, I don't know. But it felt as if this was beginning to click into place.
David Cameron and Nick Clegg sound as if they'd barely spent time together before the election. But this previously unseen footage reveals a meeting which took place many months before.
Well, he's easy to get on with, easy to talk to, and we'd spoken, I think by accident, when the government opened the Supreme Court. I think because the Prime Minister, then Gordon Brown, and the Queen were both there, they didn't really know what to do with the opposition politicians. They left Nick and me alone in this room together for about 45 minutes. Now, we didn't talk about, hung parliaments or anything like that. We just talked about politics and things, and I think that helped. So I knew that he was a reasonable person in politics for the right reasons, like me.
So long before the election, they knew they could do business. Day 3 and the Browns set off for church in Kirkcaldy.
Mr. Brown, a quick few words before you go into church.
That morning, the Prime Minister phoned an old friend to drum up support for a Lib-Lab deal.
He felt that the Liberal Democrats were natural allies of his party and that we should work with him and not with the Conservatives. And he made that point very strongly to me, and I communicated it to my colleagues.
Were you surprised that Gordon Brown rang you, and why did he ring you?
We've always communicated very well, and I think there was a sort of mutual respect, and we found it easy to talk to each other.
Easier than he did with your leader?
Yes, I think so.
I remember saying to a prominent Labour figure at one stage in the course of the weekend, look, eventually these two men are going to have to go into a room, close the door and sort this.
Gordon Brown returned to London late that afternoon. 3 full days after the election, he and Nick Clegg were to have their first meeting. Their relationship was awkward, more so the conversation they had to have about his future.
On Sunday, it became a greater possibility that the deal could be done with Labour. The key impediment to this, however, was Gordon Brown. Everybody realised that whereas it might just have been possible to do a deal with the Labour Party, it would have been impossible to do that with Gordon in place.
Gordon Brown was desperate to keep his meeting with Nick Clegg secret. He couldn't, of course, go out the front door. He tried going out at the back, and the cameras had caught him. So instead, he and Peter Mandelson went by a different route, deep underground, squeezing their way along a tunnel used by Churchill to go to the bunker at the Ministry of Defence. For Gordon Brown, it was a journey that would determine his own fate.
A custodian opened a rather sturdy door. You then go down some very, very steep steps, and then you navigated your way through, accompanied by endless sort of pipes and ducts and other sort of rigmarole and paraphernalia.